Hey everyone, it's Hungry Cat, and today we're going to take a deep dive into financial planning for a thru hike. If you've ever wondered how much it costs to thru hike a long trail like the Appalachian Trail or the Continental Divide Trail, or if you've ever just felt like it was too hard to leave a job for months at a time and save enough to achieve your thru hiking dreams, then this video is definitely for you. We're going to talk through how much a thru hike costs, what the biggest cost drivers are, the most effective levers you have to reduce the cost of a thru hike, and then we'll take all of that and dive into some useful metrics you can use when building your own budget and planning your hike. After that, we're going to switch gears from costing and budgeting, and we're going to focus on the power of compounding and saving for a thru hike, and also some creative ideas to get you thinking about how you can save for your own hike. Now, this is a bit longer format than my normal hiking videos, and it's full of a lot of detailed information, but please bear with me because if you are trying to plan your own hike and really want to understand how to budget for one, I think that there's going to be a lot of useful tips and tricks for you in this video. Outside of hiking, I've got a real passion for personal finance, and I think many people feel it's just unattainable financially to go on a thru hike, or they just can't figure out how they can possibly disrupt their lives and their paychecks to go off and hike for 4 or 5 months at a time. My biggest hope in creating this video is that it helps you better plan for and achieve your own adventures. Now, just to be clear, I am not a financial professional and this is not financial advice. So please make sure you do your own research and make informed decisions, including getting any financial advice you may need from actual professionals. This video is, however, compiled from my own real experience. I kept all of my costing data when I was thru hiking the Continental Divide Trail last year, and I tracked all of my expenses. We're going to be using that real data in this video. And I also thru hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2018. I had a prior failed attempt at thru hiking the CDT. I've done other long hikes. So my experience with the financial side of thru hiking is definitely fairly robust. Be sure and check out the video description for links to some of the things we'll talk about today, including a link to a cheaper cell phone plan that I've been using for a few years now that runs on the Verizon network that really helped me save some money on my phone bill and worked well when I was thru hiking the CDT, as well as a link to what is currently a very high interest earning savings account that's also FDIC backed that I use when I'm just trying to conservatively save for trips and other things. All that said, we've got a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. I want to begin with looking at the total cost of my CDT thru hike. But before we do, just remember that not everyone's experience will be the same. Some people are always going to find ways to spend more, and some people will always find ways to spend less. Doing this hike in my 40s and having a bit more expendable income because of that made me less price sensitive than some other hikers might be. But I'm also a pretty frugal person, and I completed the hike fairly quickly at 127 days. So I would say that my costs probably fall somewhere in the middle of the road. The information I'm going to share with you will, however, give you a data point for your own planning, and more importantly, we're going to talk about some metrics that will be even more helpful when trying to adjust what you personally will be likely to spend on your own thru hike. Now, it's important to note that for my thru hike costs, I did not include gear that I already had or brought on my hike. I think it's important to separate out the cost of gear from the cost of the hike itself. You can easily control and know what your starting gear budget is for a long hike before you ever set foot on the trail. We want to focus on the harder to predict variable costs of a thru hike, which is the knowledge that you really need to know to factor into your own planning. So on my 2022 thru hike, I spent $6,934 in total over the 127 days it took me to finish the trail. I broke these costs down into 11 categories, so let's take a look at those. Category number 1 was resupply. That was any food or other items that I purchased while in town, either to get through the next leg of hiking or as snacks while I was at the particular store. Category 2 was restaurants. Those were any meals I ate at an actual restaurant, including fast food places like McDonald's. Category 3 was to/from travel. That was the airfare, bus fare, or whatever that I paid to get to the start of the trail, and then what I paid to get home from the trail at the end. Category 4 was lodging, which was any place I stayed during the hike where I had to pay money. So that could have been a motel, a hostel, a campground, an RV park, etc. Category 5 was the shoes that I wore during the hike. Category 6 was repair or replace, and that was just the cost of gear that I had to replace along the way because it died or failed, or any postage that I had to pay for to send something back to one of the gear manufacturers. Category 7 was Garmin and search and rescue insurance. I did not include the cost of my Garmin InReach Mini because I already had that. That would fall into your pre-hike gear costs. But this did include the cost of the subscription to be able to send text messages or SOS messages, as well as a small fee for search and rescue insurance in case I needed to get helicoptered out. It was not very expensive, it was maybe $30. Category 8 was shipping. That was fees for shipping resupply items or gear to myself along the way throughout my hike. Category 9 was transport fees, and that included anything that wasn't in that original getting to the beginning of the hike and home from the end of the hike transport. So something like taking a bus in town or taking an Uber if I needed it, those types of things. Category 10 is bear spray. It's a decision hikers on certain trails have to make, and so I put it in its own category because it's fairly expensive. Category 11 was fuel. I used a stove during my trip, so this was for canister fuel. I'm very, very efficient with fuel, so your use may be a little bit higher, but later on when we talk about savings, I'll go over how I conserve fuel use on the trail. Let's take a look at the 11 cost buckets, stack ranked from highest to lowest. You can see that resupply at 29.7% is the largest expense category, followed by restaurants, to from travel, lodging, and shoes, which quite frankly surprised me. Resupply is the largest expense category. Makes a lot of sense because food is one of the few constants on trail. You aren't going to be staying in a motel or eating at a restaurant every day, but you will be eating food that you buy somewhere, which is why resupply category is so large. Looking at these categories, the first takeaway is that if you want to focus on keeping the cost of your hike down, the first 5 expense categories are where you're going to want to focus. These 5 buckets constitute 82% of your total thru-hike costs. The other hidden insight here, which we'll unpack in a moment, is that the #1 contributor to the cost of a thru-hike is the time it takes you to complete the trail. The biggest driver of the variable costs on a thru-hike is time. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the metrics I compiled from my cost data and further unpack this concept. The #1 most important metric to planning a thru-hike is cost per day. I hear a lot of thru-hikers talk about cost per mile, but that's a very flawed metric. One hiker might spend 6 months hiking the same 2,000 Appalachian Trail miles that another does in 4 months. So who's going to spend more? Of course, it's going to be the hiker who took 2 more months. So you really want to focus on cost per day instead of cost per mile in your budgeting and planning. Let's go through these metrics now. To get the cost per day, I took my total variable expenses and divided by the 127 days it took me to finish the trail. I did remove 2 non-variable expense categories, which were my travel costs to get to and from the trail termini and bear spray. These are not impacted by my time on trail and therefore need to be removed before calculating the cost per day metric. My variable expenses totaled $5,895 after removing those 2 fixed costs, and my cost per day when I divided that number by 127 days was $46.42. The reason that calculating a cost per day is so powerful is that the data is aggregated over the entire trip and therefore should be fairly representative of the average daily cost I could expect to incur for a similar hike. For example, if I wanted to go out and hike the Pacific Crest Trail, that cost per day would be a very good rough estimate for my budgeting and planning for that hike. With the cost per day metric, you can create estimated budgets. You can use my or someone else's cost per day and your anticipated days on trail. You can create your own budget and cost per day, and you can forecast a cost range for your hike based on different hike durations using the same cost per day. As an example for a budget estimation, if you know your cost per day is $46.42 and you estimate that your hike will take 150 days, you know that your estimated costs from a variable perspective will be $6,963. You can then add back in fixed costs like any gear you need, your to and from the trail transport, maybe a can of bear spray, and there you go. You can also forecast a range if you're not sure exactly how long it will take you to finish your trip. So again, if you're using that $46.42 cost per day, and you know your hike will probably take between 120 and 150 days, you can simply multiply out to get your estimated variable costs. And in this case, it would be $5,570 to $6,963. Remember, you only have 2 levers to reduce your cost per day, which are to either reduce the amount you spend or reduce the duration of your hike, or both. Now we're going to take a look back at all of those 11 expense categories and talk about a few other metrics and ways to bring your costs down. Let's take a look at the first two categories of resupply and restaurants, which are likely to be your biggest expenses. The average cost for resupply for me on my CDT thru hike was $69, and the average cost per restaurant meal was $21. If you apply the facts that my average number of days in between resupplies was 4, and that I would eat on average 3 meals per day, the average cost of a meal from resupply was only $5.75 versus $21 at a restaurant for a single meal. So, the number one way to reduce spend in these categories, other than reducing time on trail, is to eat less at restaurants and buy more of your food while in town from grocery stores. Also, I don't drink alcohol, so my bills at restaurants and things are a lot less than hikers who are out there having a few beers with their meals. Whether you like to drink alcohol or not, it's an easy thing to cut out of your budget if you are really trying to save money but still want to eat out. To and from travel. Getting to the beginning of the trail and home from the trail at the end cost me $986. Now, ways to save in this category are book your transportation in advance, check Facebook groups and see if there's anyone in your area also going to the same trail, in which case maybe you can share transport or even share a rental car. Choose buses over planes. They're definitely cheaper, even though it takes more time to get to the trail. And then if you're really trying to save money, check around on those Facebook groups for trail angels to see if maybe someone will help you get part of the way there. It's definitely worth checking it out. When it comes to lodging, there's no doubt that tenting in RV parks is a great way to go if you're trying to save money versus staying in a hotel or motel. Also, in some of the smaller towns, if the proprietors seem pretty friendly, you could ask local restaurants if you can tent behind them. Sometimes they'll let you do this, especially if you're eating your meals there. It's just, something they might do to help you out. So it's worth assessing the situation, and you can consider whether or not it's appropriate to ask. Lastly, share rooms where possible. Just share rooms with other hikers. It'll really cut down on your lodging expenses, and a lot of other hikers will be in the same position and looking to share rooms with you. I found very often that even if I didn't see people out on the trail while I was hiking, I always ran into hikers in town. Let's talk about shoes. I spent $619 on shoes on this hike. That seems crazy to me, so I really dove into this one. Now, I was wearing the Ultra Olympus shoes. I used a total of 4 pairs, and for each pair, I averaged 726 miles. So the average cost per pair for me was $155, which is quite a bit for a pair of shoes. That means that out of the 2,582 miles that I hiked on the Continental Divide Trail, I spent about 21 cents per mile with those shoes. That seems like a lot, right? Just 21 cents to walk 1 mile. So my advice for shoes is consider whether you really need the shoe that costs $155, right? Look and see if you can buy older models. Just buy an older model of the shoe, not the newest model, and hopefully you can get it for less. Buy them in advance, but also, if you find a good deal on them in advance, make sure you understand what the cost will be to ship it to yourself on trail, because that may outweigh the savings of the shoe. And then consider quality versus price. Maybe you could get away with something a little bit less, but your feet are important, so also make sure that you're not skimping on your footwear and that you're getting something that still works for you. And lastly, if you do have to buy shoes along the way, consider buying them from different sources where they offer you 10 to 15% off if you sign up for their email lists. I know backcountry.com and other places will do that. I would sign up for the email list to get the coupon so that I could save a little bit on the shoes along the way. I spent $366 on gear that I needed to repair or replace, including shipping things back and forth between companies. Gear's gonna rip and break. Make sure you carry patching material with you for your tent and things like that. And I had a lot of bad luck with sleeping pads on this trip, so you may also want to consider foam sleeping pads. The inflatable ones can be kind of temperamental, especially if you're hiking out west where there's a lot of thorny things. So if you can make it work from a comfort perspective, that could be a way to save some more expensive gear repairs. Whether or not you use something like a Garmin and have a subscription in case of emergency or so that you can keep in better touch with loved ones is a very personal decision. I enjoy the peace of mind and knowing that I have a plan B in case I break an ankle or have an emergency, but I always get the search and rescue insurance. It's very cheap and it covers emergency medical evacuation, which is incredibly expensive. If they've got to helicopter you out, that is not going to be a cheap bill. So it's worth it to me to pay the $30 odd that it costs to cover myself in that scenario. Also, check your phone plan for emergency satellite options. Some of them do cover this for a limited period of time. Just make sure you know what is covered and what isn't. One of my cost buckets was shipping fees, and that was to ship myself resupply boxes or gear along the way. My number one tip here is just to make sure that the hassle and expense of shipping is actually cheaper than just buying things locally. I was very particular about the towns that I bought things and shipped to, making sure that I only really bothered with it when I knew that I would save quite a bit of money. My other tip for this is to ship from on trail and not all of your boxes from home. Chances are your home is much farther away from trail than, say, the town or two before your stop where you need to pick up a box. So what I would do is buy food for my resupply leg and then also buy food to ship to myself farther forward along in the trail and just plan to stop at the post office in that particular town. That way I was shipping much shorter distances and I was able to save money. Transport on trail is not a huge expense usually, but I did manage to spend $230 over 4.5 months just for getting around towns and things like that. My tips here are to hitchhike where possible. Now, I encourage you to use the buddy system and take a picture of the license plate, text it to someone before you get in the car, just to be extra careful. Just make sure you're being safe and use good judgment. Trail Angels is another great way. If you're using a digital app like Far Out, you can look in the app comments and often find numbers and comments from Trail Angels who are willing to help out with rides, and that can help you cut down on this expense. Bear spray. It's an item you'll probably want if you're hiking out west just for safety reasons. There are grizzly and brown bears, but it is kind of expensive. A can of it cost me $53 in Wyoming. So one tip is to look for pre-owned bear spray at hostels and in hiker boxes. A lot of times people don't want to carry it any longer than they actually need it, and they will just give it away for free. You can also look to buy it from or sell it to another hiker when they're done using it or when you're done using it. So check into these two options before you pay full retail price at the store. The last category of expense is fuel. Now, you can cold soak or eat foods that don't require cooking. That's a great way to save here. You don't even need a stove and you save weight. I just like hot food. If you are using a stove, when you turn on the stove, always cook using the lowest possible flame to make the fuel last longer. It will take longer to cook your food, but you will definitely save fuel and make it last a lot longer doing that. Use heavy-duty aluminum foil to make a lid covering for your pot. It weighs almost nothing, but just keeping that heat trapped in while you're cooking is going to also help you to save fuel. Now that we've talked about those 11 expense categories, let's talk about time. Reducing time on trail saves money. So my number one tip here is to hike longer days, not faster, and take shorter breaks. 2 miles per hour is a pretty common hiking pace. So if you think about it, at a 2 mile per hour pace, an extra 2 hours per day is 4 miles. Hiking 24 instead of 20 miles per day over a 2,500 mile hike will save about 20 days of hiking. At a cost per day of $46, that's a $920 savings, so that's pretty material. Another tip here is to time your start and finish, carefully considering snow, if that's a factor for your hike. Dealing with snow can be a very significant expense, especially if you have to get off trail and wait snow out, or if it slows you down, or you need to buy extra gear to deal with it. Snow is a tricky one, but if you can avoid serious snow conditions, you will save money. All right, up to this point, we've talked about how much a thru hike costs, using the cost per day metric to budget for a thru hike. We've talked about 11 expense categories and ways to minimize costs in those categories. And now we're going to talk a little bit about saving for a thru hike. Now, obviously, taking this much time away from work is a big commitment, and it is probably one of the more daunting aspects of a hike if you're giving up your job and then not going to have any income coming in or not going to have much income coming in. So it's a big consideration. So savings is probably going to be on everyone's mind when they're planning for a trip like this. My first rule of thumb when you're looking at saving for a hike is to scrutinize everything. Always think about any dollar you spend in terms of what that means for your trip. So just as an example, if you're estimating that your personal cost per day is $55, let's say you go out and decide it's a good idea to buy a drink at Starbucks for $7. Well, if your cost per day is $55 and that drink is costing you $7, that's 13% of one day on the trail. So every dollar that you spend can be thought of in terms of what it costs for you to have a day on trail. Attach a price to everything, see how little you can buy. We live in a convenience culture, but convenience is one of the most expensive things out there, so don't fall victim to convenience. Cook your meals at home instead of going out to eat, or maybe walk instead of driving your car. Anytime something is convenient, it is going to cost you more money. Some things may seem like small savings, but at the same time, every little bit of money that you can save will help you to plan for your trip. Always remember that the easiest money to save is the money that you don't spend. Now this may seem a little bit extreme or overly frugal, but at the end of the day, you have to decide how much it's worth you to achieve this dream of a long hike or a thru hike versus whatever it is you're going to spend money on. It's always a choice, right? Now it may seem extreme to try and save these small amounts of money, but what we want to do is take those small amounts of money and put them in a high interest savings account so that that money can then earn us money while we're saving more money. Now these high interest savings accounts, at the time of this video, you can currently get them in the 4.8 to 5% range, which is great. That means that over a year's time, your money could earn 4.8 to 5%. But with an annual percentage rate, you're actually earning interest every month. So you earn money on your money each month, and then that new amount of money earns money on that new amount of money the next month. This is called compounding. It's the idea that the rolling stone gathers moss. Your money grows faster with each month because of the compounding factor. Applying this type of scrutiny to your spending may seem a little extreme, and maybe it's not for you, but remember that the easiest money to save is the money that you don't spend. So I highly recommend that you find a high interest savings account that is FDIC insured so that your funds are safe, and you use that for anything you're saving towards the trail so that it will compound as you get closer and closer to needing that money for your hike. Now, I've been using Wealthfront for a long time for a high interest savings, and I'm earning somewhere around 4.8% today. I included a link in the video description if you want to check it out, but I definitely encourage you to shop around for the highest rate you can find. Just remember, you want to make sure that it's FDIC backed so that you do have that coverage in case something were to happen with that institution. Okay, so remember my top 2 tips are: the easiest money to save is the money you don't spend. Be frugal, keep your eye on the prize, and ABC, always be compounding. Make sure you get as high an interest vehicle as you can for a savings account so that you can make that money that you do save or that you do earn work for you towards your trip goal. Some other techniques you might explore are, with your work, maybe you don't have to actually quit your job. Maybe it's possible for you to negotiate a sabbatical where you can take the time you need off and then come back to work afterwards. And if they're not open to that, maybe you could even turn it into a branding exercise where, I don't know, you wear a company logo on your gear, or you do some type of social media posts for them along the way so they can show off what a great company they are to work for on something like LinkedIn or a platform like that. And think creatively about it. Think about how you want to approach it with your boss or your manager, and maybe they'll be more inclined to work with you than you think, and you won't actually have to quit your job. You could also try starting a GoFundMe, using a platform like that online. It's very exciting to see someone achieve a big goal like this, and you might be surprised that the people in your life are willing to help out a little bit with your expenses. Other things you can look into are sponsorships, either maybe from gear companies, if you have some kind of social media presence. You could also look into programs for veterans if you have served in the military. I've heard about programs out there for veterans that will help to supplement or fund things like thru hikes, so it may be worth looking into. We talked about saving small amounts here and there and putting them in savings accounts so they can compound. You can also use apps like Ibotta or those types of grocery apps where you can get discounts on groceries and get cash back. When it comes to your lodging, get a roommate. That'll cut your rent in half. Maybe even go as extreme as trying living out of your car for a period of time, or moving in with the parents. Whatever you need to do to save money. Lodging and rent are usually a big expense, so anything you can do to cut that down will help. When it comes to work, can you work remotely? Maybe you can take your job somewhere cheap like Mexico or some other country for a little bit, so that can help you save money on rent and daily expenses. We talked about high yield savings accounts like the Wealthfront account that I included a link to in the video description. If you're more advanced in personal finance, you could look at other income generating exchange traded funds, ETFs, that could help you earn higher rates of return, but they may be less liquid and carry more risk. So just make sure that you consult with a financial professional if you are going to go that route. Other ways to save. If you go out a lot with friends and you like to have a few drinks when you're going out, just cut out the alcohol from your drinking and drink tap water. It'll really help you save, and that's all money you can put towards your trail excursion. Do you have anything you can rent while you're out? Do you own a house? Maybe you could rent that while you're out on the trail. Do you have a car that maybe you could rent to a friend while you're gone? Anything that you might be able to rent out to someone that would help fund or minimize your expenses while away is worth looking into. Remember again, the easiest money to save is the money you don't spend. So scrutinize everything and just think of everything in terms of achieving that dream of a through hike or a long hike. And with that lens, you may just decide that saving that money instead of spending it is the right decision in the moment. Lastly, your cell phone bill. A lot of people wonder what the best network is for hiking on the trails, and in general, in my experience, I've found it to be the Verizon network, especially on the Appalachian Trail. That said, Verizon, AT&T, those normal subscriptions are really expensive. I got very excited before I hiked the Continental Divide Trail because I found this network called Visible. Visible is a cheap, pay-by-the-month cell phone plan. I only spend $25 a month for it, but it uses the Verizon network, so I have the same reception that I would get with Verizon. I have unlimited data, unlimited talking minutes, and it's just a month-by-month plan that's $25 a month. I love it. It worked great for me out on the CDT. I'm not going back to regular Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile. Visible's the way I'm gonna go. If you're interested in that, there's a link in the video description that I think gives you a little bit of a discount if you join Visible. You might want to check it out. Again, it's worked really well for me and it really helped me cut down on my phone expense. All right, everybody, I know that was a lot, but I hope you found value in it. I hope after watching this video that you feel more confident in terms of your ability to understand about what a thru hike might cost and how to budget and plan for your own hike. If you did find any value in this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and consider sharing it with your friends and family. I hope you all are well and happy. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.